What is up, world? And welcome back to another episode of the Seeds of Success podcast. Today's a special one. Today's a special one. Today is the first time that I will be sharing my, let's call it the origin story of who Colin Walters is. Over time, I've become a little bit more open with my journey in sobriety, not drinking, right? Which is a huge part of my story, especially over these last 7 years. And today I want to share this interview that I did with my very good friend, Mario Minert, where we dug into that. We dug into the origin story of getting the DUI and how I decided that was not going to be the best thing that happened to me, but it happened for me. Dug into how I had to borrow $2,000 from my parents to even be able to afford an attorney at that time, move back into my parents' house, right? A very humbling experience. And then the journey I've gone through to get to where I'm at today, which is, an awesome life to speak of, three houses, three rental properties to my name, a what I consider to be a thriving career and one that I've been able to help a lot of people with. We talk about my journey in sobriety and not drinking. We talk about, a lot of different aspects of what has attributed to my success, right? Because something monumental happens like this in your life, you have a decision to make. You can either react or you can choose your own response. And so it's in this that we dive into, right? We talk about how I actually also got started in sales and business, my very, very early cold calling days, which I love talking about those stories because it's super fun to me. How I was working Parks and Rec, right? Listening to audiobooks and podcasts and always consuming like high quality content. I didn't know where it was going to take me, right? But ultimately I knew that it was going to lead to something. I didn't know what that something was, but we dive into all those things. And it was fun to be on the flip side of being interviewed instead of being the interviewer. We talk also about how I landed not only 100 podcasts and how we got to that milestone, but also how I landed an interview with Dan Martell, who was my like number one dream guest to have on the podcast, and how I drove to Kelowna, Canada and met him, and the things I learned through this journey, things I learned from him, things I learned from his mentor and coach, Ed Milet, right? And we dive into some of my key takeaways that you all will be able to take away from and learn from. We dive into some of the behind the scenes, and it was a super cool interview. One I've never done, one I've never spoken so publicly about, but it was time. And I do want to just be super candid with you. Like in this episode, I talk about my journey in recovery and sobriety and, being fully, completely sober. And as of recently, about 2 months ago, I actually did try a THC drink. So I don't feel comfortable saying that I am like 100% completely sober because that's what, in a trip, this was recorded like 3 or 4 months ago. And so that actually took place after this episode. So I do just want to preface that. It was a horrible experience. I don't suggest that experience to anybody. And that is something I want no part of. It had been like 8 years since I had, consumed THC. And so, anyways, I do just want to be super candid with you and touch on that as we go through this interview. But at the end of the day, life is about the choices that we make. We can live and learn, or we can react, right? But we ultimately have that choice to respond to any given situation, and we can choose for things to either happen to us or for us. And so I hope that you can take away any sort of, insight or motivation or inspiration or whatever you want to take away from this, right? And I hope that it serves you in some capacity. And thank you for tuning in to another episode. So I'm excited to roll the tape. And here we go, diving into this interview.
Colin, welcome to the show, man.
I appreciate it, Mario. Glad to be on.
Like, I'm super pumped for today because we were just talking about
Me
this
too.
before we hit record. Like, how many similarities there are between you and me. And like when I think about you, like I think about entrepreneurship, podcasts, speaking,
Mhm.
content, traveling, got the baseball like athlete background. And we've both officiated weddings as
That's right.
well.
Yeah.
Like, what else am I missing? Like, is there anything else?
Spanish,
Spanish,
Costa Rica.
your mom's connection, right? And
Yep.
it's just like the connection that we had when we first, kind of met in working together. It's just really special. And so I was actually recently inspired by Jesse Itzler's commencement speech.
Mm,
And I don't know, did you watch it at all?
I have not.
Okay. Well, here
Definitely plan
basically
on it.
the whole point of his talk is some of the best lessons and advice come from the people that are closest to you.
Mm.
And what you really want to do is when you recognize it, you want to acknowledge it and actually come up with a name with a rule based off of them. And when I was thinking about you, I'm thinking about the Collins rule. And I think about how passionate you really are and how you follow your passions and how you inspire other people to do the same.
Mm.
And so I just want to start with just saying, like, I admire you for how passionate you are with all of these things and how you've inspired me to follow my passions as well. So that is the Collins rule.
Well, I appreciate that. I didn't realize that I had a Collins rule. So it's kind of like nicknames, you know. It's nice when other people see the things in yourself that you don't often see or give yourself credit for. So it's nice to hear that. In what ways do you think I've inspired you to follow your passions?
I think it's just all of those things that I just mentioned, but specifically with the podcast and just
Mm,
seeing, because when we first started talking and working together, I think you were just maybe 3 or 4 or 5
yeah.
episodes in. And then to see the consistent growth and to see you hit 100 podcasts and reach your dream guest, which we're going to talk about today.
Hmm.
I think it's just inspiring to see somebody go after their dreams like that. And as I was thinking about how to start it, I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. And we're definitely going to get into the podcast and the dream guest today. And you talked a lot about seeds of success, but I know that your story is bigger than that. And so, can you tell me a little bit more about your background and how kind of some of your background and some of your setbacks have actually prepared you for the success that you have right now?
First off, I just want to say thank you for having me on the show. And I
Yeah,
do agree, like we're cut from a very similar cloth. And, I think that it is no coincidence that we're aligned here in life. And so, for those listening, name is Colin Walters, from the greater Seattle area. And origin story, where do we begin? I'll just start with this. So I studied sport management and Spanish in college, graduated, coaching baseball, working parks and rec, doing side hustles. I was doing Spanish tutoring, I was doing coaching lessons, I was doing hitting lessons, I was doing selling isogenics, like multi-level marketing type stuff. I always had this entrepreneur spirit, like hands dipped in 10 different things at one time. And I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I had a passion for teaching and coaching with baseball. I knew I had a passion for being outdoors, but when I was working Parks and Rec, I was always listening to podcasts and to audiobooks. Like I was listening to the Zig Ziglars, the Jim Rohns, the Earl Nightingales, right? The Strangest Secret.
nice.
And it was like I had all these things just on repeat, not knowing where the direction was I was going to go, but knowing that at some point in time, I would be either doing sales or business or entrepreneurship or something. And I was just super into personal development and growth. And I got a call one day from a friend's mother of mine who called me up. I'll never forget the day. I had just walked out of the gym and she's like, "Hey, Colin, I run an insurance business and I would love for you to come and do cold calling for me." She was like, I was running through my brain who could be like an awesome person to do some cold calling for me once a week, for 2 or 3 hours. And I'll pay you $50 if you set the appointment, and I'll double it if they sign on. And I was like, deal.
Let's
And so
go.
I remember it was Thursdays I would go in and, first time wearing a nice little suit, or not even suit, like a button up, and nice dress pants and oversized tie and oversized shirt, the whole deal. and went into my little office, and it was like, landline phone that I'm calling from. And I'll never forget, like, the first one, the first call that I made, guy answered. I stood up. I was so nervous. I had no clue what I was doing. But if there's anything that I am really good at selling, it is other people that I
Mm,
believe in. That is the best thing that I've ever sold to date. And I've sold software, automation, technology. I'm in cybersecurity right now. I've sold DocuSign. Still to this date, the best thing that I have ever sold is my belief in people when I truly do believe in them. And I just knew in my heart that a 20-minute call between this guy and her name was Susie Nelson. And Susie would definitely add value to his life. And sure enough, he took the meeting, that deal closed, and I was like hooked from that point on. And so I had that entrepreneur like itch. And then I was doing like a couple days a week. And then I met friend, one of her friends at a wedding that kind of like connected all these dots. She ran her own employee benefit shop. And she basically recruited me to come and do a full-time gig with her in business development, doing it on a, like a professional 9 to 5, right? Like actually doing this thing from the business and sales side of things. And so that's when I decided that I was going to stop doing the Parks and Rec. It was like all this learning and curiosities of, learning about sales in the past and business. It all like came to fruition through some conversations and connections and just the people that you meet in life. You literally just never know what one conversation is going to lead to, Mario. It's crazy, man. Like it never ceases to amaze me, like the exact dots that had to align in order
yeah.
to actually get to where I am standing today, which is just like
And
crazy,
I think it's really cool to hear you talk about like that first win, like that
Mm,
first moment
the
that got
best.
you that sense of accomplishment
Mhm.
that encourage you to keep going. And it's really cool to have those wins and to look back on them and just think how, now compared to like what you're doing, it's really like so small
Yeah.
compared to what you're doing now. But everybody has like that first win and that
Mhm.
first person that gave you that opportunity. And so that's really cool to hear about.
That first person to give you the opportunity, and the person and people that have belief in you,
Hmm.
because she transferred her belief in me to me being able to believe in myself. Like I knew that I was, had a gift of communication, had a gift of being able to connect with humans and make connections, do these things. But it wasn't until she looked me in the eye and said, Colin, you are like very naturally good at this and you can really make a career out of this for yourself. She instilled that belief in me from such a young and early age in my career that catapulted me. So then when I actually had that success, it was like her belief was then instilled in me. And then my belief was then like layered on top of that. And then the more
Hmm.
you learn, the more you do, the more that you grow, and the more like that you actually build up these accomplishments and proof that you are actually good and can do these things. It's, so for those listening to just really lean in to other people's belief in you when you get that and be open to receiving that, because that was what really set me off, and then I joined the employee benefit shop. Shout out Nancy Giacalone for the opportunity, Nick Giacalone and Olympic Crest Insurance, and a little, small boutique firm here in the Gig Harbor, Washington area where I was living at the time. And that's when I did it on a professional scale. So I was like cold calling. If there was a sign that I saw driving down the road, I was calling that number 3 times that day. If there was, a sign on a car driving by, I was calling it. If there was,
Wow.
we would drive around, walk in, shake hands, introduce ourselves, do live cold calls, and it was just so much fun to be creative, to learn, to just have this like curiosity itch of like, how can we get people to, say yes to a meeting, show up to that meeting, and then actually add value to their day to day. So it was really cool, and it was like my way of earning my keep, and working in the mud, if you will, and just like so many calls, and like those were the early days of really getting going in my career. And then I think where I can transition at this point is things were going super well until there was a very pivotal moment in my life where it is the I had just started this job actually. Things were going well. We were like I think a month and a half or 2 months in, and then the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving is when everybody goes out in town here, and they go to this like little bar down the road, and that night I end up getting arrested before a DUI. I remember getting pulled over. I knew this was I knew this was basically like, yep, I am for sure. Uh, Long story short, I got pulled over for a DUI and spent the night in jail. I had my dad pick me up from jail on Thanksgiving morning, and so this was a
Wow.
position in my life where never in a million years did I think that I would be in this position. I remember actually like praying to God that night for like the first time ever. Like one of those prayers, like, God, if you're real, like, you know, this is, I need you right now because I don't know what I'm doing in life, like making decisions like this. And so, that was the pivotal moment for me, especially once I decided that this was going to be the best thing that ever happened for me, right? Because I think it can be very easy to be like, this happened to me, play a victim card, but it was like I felt like this was a gift. And once it was actually Ed Milet, I was listening to a podcast like, a couple of weeks after or something along those lines. And I remember him very specifically saying, when we are able to adopt the mindset of things happening for us, that's when we have the chance and opportunity to see the silver linings that can come from experiences like this. And so that was my wake up call, man. And you know, fast forward plenty of, actually at that point in time, I had just moved to Seattle. So I had to borrow money from my parents and move out of my house in Seattle, move back in to my parents' house, borrow money from them, go in debt to actually pay my attorney, to pay the lawyers, to pay all these court fees. I
Wow.
had to then, figure out a way to then start earning money while doing all this court stuff. Like, you want to talk about a way to grow up really quickly? It's like going through experiences like this that'll force you to, because it was nobody's business but my own to go and figure this out and get things handled. And so, that's when I just was like, super driven from that point on. That was like, you know, 5 a.m. back in the gym. I remember sitting on the gym floor like in those early days and writing out on my phone what I wanted the vision of my life to be. And I was writing in the present tense in the future, if that
Mm.
makes sense. Like
Yeah.
here, top sales rep in this company, working out X days a week, running all these, miles and family and just like writing this vision for my life. That I remember finding that note a couple years back and I was like, holy shit, dude, like I actually crossed off a lot of that vision came to reality, which was crazy.
That's
But
amazing.
because it's like in these moments, this is where inspiration can come from if you decide to look at it that way. But that's 100% on you and however you want to decide to look at it, right? And I had a lot of very, very important people in my life who drastically helped me be able to overcome these things, right? Family, friends. I had just got that new job with Olympic Crest Insurance, and Nancy was there to support me in however best that she could. And at the end of the day, it still is like, you are the one in the driver's seat. What are you going to do about it? And so it was a really good 7 months. 7 months down the road, I decided that we were in Mexico on a family vacation, and I decided that I was going to have a beer. And I had been 7 months sober at that point. I
Mm.
was like, the DUI happened. I'm like, that's it. I'm freaking done with that shit. And so fast forward these 7 months, an amazing 7 months, like very transformative and growth oriented. And I remember being on the boat and I'm like, you know what? I think I'm gonna have a beer. Told my parents, and they're like, hey, you make your own decisions. You're your own man. Did they probably have some apprehensions to the idea? Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's, you are responsible for your life and the decisions that you make and whatever those consequences are. And that one beer, it was like nothing ever left. right? I was blacked out that same night, and
Wow.
it was like I'd been drinking, consistently all those 7 months prior. It was crazy. It just all came right back. And it's not that I had like, these super massive problems with drinking or alcohol or drugs or anything. But are there times where alcohol negatively impacted my life? For sure. So many of them. You can turn into a different person. Sure, 7 out of 10 times, like everything's going to be great. But those 3 times can drastically impact your life forever, depending on what happens. Like that was the first time, like I woke up that next morning. I was supposed to go diving with my uncle in Mexico and woke up, dead phone. Not to the alarm, like woke up with dead phone, late to go diving,
Hmm.
still drunk from the night before. And he's like, dude, like, what the hell, man?
What's going on?
Yeah. And my uncle and I have a very tight relationship in this sense, um, of life. And so, yeah, so fast forward, like coming back from Mexico, still drinking, and at this point in time, I have a breathalyzer in my car. So you got to like do your blow and go in order to actually start your car to be able to drive. And that wasn't, that's like $100 a month. Like paid tens of thousands of dollars for this thing, and I didn't have money at that time. Like, I was just trying to earn my way and trying to make it back out of my parents' house that I had to move back into at age 24 or whatever, right? Which is humbling in itself, moving
Yeah.
back into your parents' house as an adult, back into your childhood room. It wasn't until July 18th, July 19th, 2018, that we were out at a casino for Clearwater Casino for my sister's birthday. And that was the night where I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop drinking at 10 p.m. so that I can be fine in the morning to do the breathalyzer, do the blow and go, and be able to drive to work because it was like a Thursday night or something, Wednesday night. And sure enough, 2 a.m. rolls around, still drinking, and end up blowing violations into the breathalyzer that next morning. So
Hmm.
that was the first time that drinking had ever impacted my professional life. And that was the deciding factor for me that drinking was not out of the question. The moment that it impacted my professional career, was my deciding point. And so that was the last time that I had a sip of alcohol was July. So July 19th, 2018. So, in about a month and a half or so, will be 6 years without any substance in my body. It's been an amazing, 5, 6 years basically. Just there was a lot that went into this. It's can't tell you how many court dates, AA meetings, right? Required to go to AA 2 times a week for 2 years. I was doing outpatient treatment, started out 5 times a week for the first couple of months. And then it was 4 times a week. Then it was 3 times a week. Did the hardest work that I've ever done in my entire life, doing, all the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and getting a sponsor, being a sponsor, like doing all the work, steps 4 and 5, like getting things that you've never talked about or that I had never talked about to anybody in my life out of my head and onto paper and
Mm.
then spoken to another human. That was the scariest shit I've ever gone through. I can't tell you how many tears I've cried. I can't tell you how many heartaches I've had. I can't tell you how much pain it caused. But what I can tell you is that the liberation and the freedom that came from all of this is ultimately why this was the greatest thing that ever happened for me, right? In the sense of like being able to release things that were holding me back mentally, spiritually, emotionally, to then be able to actually move my life forward in ways that I personally don't think I ever would have done had it not been for this experience. And so, you know, fast forward those 6 years and moved into tech sales, have bought multiple homes, real estate investment. I remember those early days, like, making all my calls and booking meetings and officially built up enough finances to move into my own apartment out of my parents' house and then move up to the big city, move into a super cool and fun, fast moving tech sales company, crushed it there, got promoted, paid off all my student loans, bought a house, rented it out, bought another, like just all these things that started happening. And it was just like, it's an amazing thing when you can just really focus on what matters to you, right? Because along with all of that was just the relationships in my life, right, continue to just be the most amazing relationships that I think I've ever had, right? Especially connections, relationship with my family, my parents, my significant others, friends, family, just anybody and everybody, right? And man, it's crazy. I've never actually told this story on, out live and in public, and so it can go so many different ways. There's so much filler and there's so many important details, but I think that at the crux of it is, like, for the audience that's listening here, it's that whatever happens to us in life, we have the choice of how we want to move forward and respond to things. Yes, things are extremely painful. Yes, things are going to hurt. Yes, we're going to make excruciating mistakes and failures in life, and ultimately it's who do you need to become to overcome these things, right? And be the type of person that you needed in those moments,
Mm-hmm.
right? And actually be able to use that as an opportunity to move your life forward. So, anyway, I know I'm just kind of
Man,
rambling. Yeah.
thank you
So,
for sharing that with me. Like seriously, like it takes like I'm really proud of you for how far you've come and for sharing that story because I know somebody who's listening to this or somebody who is going to hear it on your podcast or in your newsletter or something, they're really going to resonate with it and they're going to need it. And I know that that's something that Dan Martell talks about is he's trying to become the person that he needed
mhm,
on like his darkest day, in his
mhm.
lowest moment. So I'm curious for you, what is something that you would say to yourself, however many years ago it was, on your lowest day, knowing what you know now? What would you
I
say to yourself?
I would say exactly what Jim Giacalone told me. This is Jim, the husband of Nancy. I spoke to him that next day after the DUI, and he told me,
Mm,
Colin, you have to have been where you were to get to where you are. And so you have to go through these valleys in life to actually be able to climb the mountain ahead of you. Right. And so, like, that just, I'll never forget how he told me in a way that was so pivotal. So if you're going through something, right, just know, like, you have to have been here in order to get going to where you can ultimately get to. Right. And
mhm.
so I think that's ultimately what I would tell somebody, along with, like, this, as long as you decide that this is going to be the greatest thing that ever happened, not to you, but for you,
Yeah.
that's when you can take the power back to actually go and make this the best thing that ever happened for you. Very particular with your words.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in that as well. I'm curious, do you think you need to go through something like this to then develop that perspective, or can you just adopt and embrace that perspective now for future events? How do you think about that?
For me, I think that I needed to go through it, and because it was kind of just smooth sailing up until that point. And it's in
Yeah.
those moments that you have to actually become somebody better than who you are currently being, was my experience. I
Hmm.
just felt like I could have just kept consistently getting a little bit better, but, like, actually getting down into the dirt in the valley required me to become somebody that was so much more than the person that I was being from mentally, right? And actually being able to overcome these challenges. I just think that it catapulted my development to the person that I was ultimately hoping to become, right? And so yeah,
That's
that's
really
kind of
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
that's really cool to hear. And there's like a couple of things there that I heard even in your story that played a role in you bouncing back and becoming the person that you're meant to be. Like
Mhm.
first was like your faith. Like you had that
Yeah.
moment with God, like God, if you're real, like please
Mhm.
help me
Yeah.
through this. You also had those key people that were there at the exact moment that you needed and
Mhm.
said the exact things that you needed to hear.
Mhm.
And those things were kind of what allowed you to then make the decision and to have the perspective of this is actually going to be a good thing for me. And I'm going to
Mhm.
decide to take this and to use it as almost like a catalyst for change.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, how has that experience almost change your perspective on the goals that you go after and the life that you have, and even just those passions that you pursue moving forward?
Well, I could focus, right? Like those things were wishes. They weren't actual, like tangible things that I was going after. They were pie in the sky at that time, right? It
Yeah.
was I had these, these ideas of things I wanted to do, but there was something powerful for me being able to remove these obstacles of, a 3-day bender on the weekend, or
Mm.
just, thought process. Like I always was waiting or thinking about the day when I didn't have to think about all the other bullshit going on in my head, right? With drinking, or maybe it was smoking, or maybe it was whatever.
Mm.
And I was able to actually get very clear on what I wanted. It was like it removed like the fog.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to the gym floor that day, it was like 5:30 a.m. and I was, sitting there on my phone, like had this crystal clear vision. So I think I was able to actually get clear on where I wanted my life to go and what I needed to actually do to get there. And so I think just like total focus is what opened up for me,
Mm.
along with just like clarity and thought, man. It was just,
Yeah.
like you
That's
can actually handle the problems coming your way. Like the problems aren't going to go anywhere, but you are going to be far more equipped to handle problems. I was far more equipped to handle the problems coming my way. They weren't going away, but they were better and bigger
mhm.
problems to solve. And then once we got over those problems, and, for example, how the hell am I going to move back out of my parents' house? Right? Like 24 years old,
Yeah.
and now I'm in debt to my parents and living in their house. Let's figure this shit out, dude. Right. And so then actually making a plan of, okay, I need to do X amount of calls, you know, this month. Let's break that back per week. Let's break that back per day. Let's put some goals and rewards in front of me to actually move results forward in that life. Let's then go and make this massive jump into a totally new industry and new career to expedite my earning income and potential and growth and development from
Mm.
sales and business acumen. And, let's put myself out there with, massive goals in the health and fitness and endurance space. And I was, doing marathons and running relentlessly and working out every day. I was cleaning the yoga studio at 5 a.m. and in order to get free yoga to just, earn my way through things. And,
Mm.
it was like the deep work was also very instrumental. Going through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous was no small task. That was the hardest, most challenging, most rewarding work I've ever done,
Mm.
making amends to people that you love, saying sorry for the shit that you never said sorry for or ever wanted to deal with. Actually taking these things out of your head that have haunted you for years and years since freaking childhood, that you can finally get out and share with another human being. It was like, man, it created a sense of focus of actually getting into like the core and soul of who you are for me.
That's that's powerful, man. Like like it gave you that drive. It gave you hunger, gave you
Hmm.
clarity,
For sure.
and it gave you the freedom to be yourself.
Hmm.
And kind of what I want to transition to now is like this whole story and these habits and these passions set the stage for your podcast. And
Yeah.
start to tell me about. I know that one of the things I'm super excited to hear about is you set a goal for your 100th podcast to be Dan Martell. Tell us the story about your podcast and the landing Dan Martell. How did this all happen?
Yeah, so Seeds of Success podcast, man. What a concept. For those listening, you probably have people tell you that you're really good at something,
Hmm.
right? Like we all have those things, and for me, something that I would consistently hear and I would always be writing it down in my Apple Notes was you have a voice and you have, like you're, meant for radio, something like that. And so I was always thinking about this podcast. And I was like, you know what? I didn't do like I initially went to school for sports broadcasting, didn't pan out. I decided to go a different route. Bottom line though is I wanted to do something with my voice and I wanted to do something like in the realm of like this podcast. And so one day I was like, you know what? I'm sick of thinking about this without doing anything about it. So let me actually do something about this. And I remember, I don't know where the Seeds of Success name came from, but that was the first thing I did. is I chose the name Seeds of Success. I knew I wanted it to be about personal development, growth, transformative action, and be able to interview and meet people who are doing super cool things in the world that will have stories to share with individuals that can just help people in whatever way. Like that was,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have like this grand vision of it, but I remember the day where I was like, all right, cool. I got the name. Now it's time to buy a USB or a microphone. And so I remember just researching till all in and paralysis by analysis, couldn't pull the trigger, and then weeks went by, still hadn't purchased this microphone, still had this pie in the sky idea of a podcast. And until one day I'm like, dude, just buy the freaking microphone. Like, stop wasting time with this. So I bought this like little USB mic, $30. It came, it arrived, and it was like my holy grail. I looked at it, I put it on the shelf, and it didn't touch it for, like another 4 weeks.
Well, that's
And
exactly what happened for me too. So I feel
such
you
a
on that.
such a similar story for
It is.
everybody that's probably started a podcast, and
Yeah.
props to anybody listening that just pulled the trigger and was ripping the stage a day later. So anyways, I remember coming back in one day and I saw the podcast on my shelf and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do something I'm going to do something crazy today. And I'm going to open the freaking box. And so I pulled it off of the shelf and I'm like, dude, just open the box. And so
Yep.
that was all I did. I was like, you don't need to record anything. Just what is the number one action you can take right now? And so I opened the box and I plugged it in. We'll fast forward, all the different writings and restructures and all the things to, before clicking record that happened. And finally got 3 episodes done. And, it was like back to back to back, December of 2020. And then went on a year and a half hiatus. And then the podcast, died or went to sleep, went dormant. And then it was a year and a half later, I'm listening to a podcast between Sam Brider and Matt Choi. And I remember being super inspired in this podcast to reach out to Sam Brider and say something along the lines of, yo, man, great podcast with Matt Choi. Would love to have you on mine. I was cleaning the Airbnb at this time when I was living in Corvallis, Oregon. And I remember stopping the vacuum and I grabbed my phone and I messaged him. I'm like, I'm messaging him right now to take this action and act on the inspiration. And then I asked him to come on the show and told him I got time next week to lock myself into this date to ensure that it actually happens so that there's no escape clause. And then we were locked in. So I sent him a Zoom invite and we were locked in to do a podcast that next week. So Sam Brider was episode number 4. And from that day forward, I decided that, you know what, I'm going to commit to doing this thing. And so fast forward, I think like 4 episodes, I had like 8 episodes fully published on the Seeds of Success podcast. And I saw Dan Martell post on Instagram. He had just released his book. And so he was looking to do like a podcast tour in order to promote his book and do the whole marketing podcast tour thing. And so I reached out to him and was like, hey, man, like I got a podcast. I had been following his stuff for years at this point, and Dan's just a freaking stud. And I reached out and he said, hey, man, thanks for reaching out, but I'm need bigger reach and a bigger audience. Let me know when you get to 100 and I'll come on the show. And so that message changed my life because I now had a goal with a reason behind it, right? There's something very powerful, not of just having the goal, but the why behind what you're doing. And so that is how that actually happened. And then I remember a couple episodes later, and I told him, deal, done. Right. And so then like
Yes.
over time, I was planting a little seed here and there, like, maybe I got to like 20 or something or 30 or 40. And I was like, hey, man, like, see you in
Making
60,
progress.
see you in
Yeah.
50. Yeah. I remember actually driving one day, I was listening to a podcast on the Content Capitalist podcast. Dan Martell was on it, talking to the host, whose name is Ken. And Dan talked about doing this decade-long commitment. A
Right.
decade meant, right? Is that what it's called? A decade meant. And so I remember hearing him talk about this, and he was like, if you are going to commit to doing something and you see yourself doing it, commit to doing for a decade. And then
Mm.
he was referencing his YouTube channel where he had posted every Monday for the last 8 years or something. And so he was like closing in on his decade. And remember that. I mean, I remember hearing that. And I remember as soon as I was parked, writing down everything that I was thinking, committing to this decade long commitment of doing the podcast. And then I went and recorded a podcast episode that I think it was like episode number 16 or something, where I said on the podcast that I was going to commit to doing a podcast a week for the next decade. And so it was like I made that public commitment. So I started, I reignited it.
Yep.
Dan said get to 100. I now had a plan in place on how to get to 100 by posting one a week. And I was just going to commit to doing one a week, like not thinking about 100 episodes, not thinking about 10 years, but thinking about doing one this week. And whatever else happens, happens. And I know I'm going to get better throughout time. I know I'll be able to become more efficient and effective with the process. I know that it'll force me to be creative and
Hmm.
force me to, think differently, produce differently, act on inspiration, like all these things, be able to communicate effectively, be able to also build different channels and social followings from doing all of this and connect with amazing humans all along the way. And so that was ultimately kind of what set this thing in motion. And so, yeah, man, fast forward, like once I got to 80, I
Yeah.
started getting a little nervous
Oh yeah.
because I was like, I got to 80. I'm like, oh my God, like this 100 is actually going to happen. I should probably reach out to Dan here soon. And with that first message, when I sent at 8 episodes, I was nervous to even send that episode
Hmm.
or send that message to him because part of me, Mario, is I was kind of hoping that he would say no because
Yeah.
I was nervous. I didn't want to
Hmm.
have to actually do it, but I knew that I would regret not at least asking in that moment. And I'm so glad that, I took action in spite of the resistance, which I
Oh
think
yeah.
is just what everybody should do is follow that resistance and get curious. And it was this moment of like, wow, now I'm at 80. And then everyone I posted after that, I was like a little bit more nervous. Well, I'm at 87, a little more nervous. And then once I got to 90, I was like, holy shit, I should probably reach out to Dan and actually start lining this thing up because this is going to happen. And so
Yeah.
I reached out to Dan on Instagram. He said, hey, reach out to this email address, connect with my assistant. She'll get you squared away. I reached out to his executive assistant and we got coordinating over email. I couldn't believe the day that we were actually booked for May 14th, 2024. And I made sure to do it on a Tuesday in order to be able to go and do the founders hike that same morning. And then that was kind of what happened. So I actually drove to Kelowna, Canada to go and do this thing and go record this at Martell Media Studios. And yeah, man, so it just happened and
So many things are like
so many
so cool
things.
about this story. Like
Mhm.
first thing is you had the courage to reach out to him when you only had eight episodes.
Right.
One, that's super cool. Two, he responded and he didn't just say no. What he responded with a challenge
Mhm.
and a really difficult challenge because
Mhm.
I don't know exactly what the stats are, but I think I've read like it's like 90% of podcasts have quit after like 6 episodes.
Right.
So it for him to respond and to challenge you, I think is equally as cool. And then for you to just consistently push through and knock it out, and then for him to say yes to it, like such a cool backstory. And now, like, tell me, what was it like actually sitting there and doing the interview, and walk me through the actual interview and what were some of the main takeaways that you had from your conversation with him?
For your audience listening, I just want to remind you how amazingly powerful it is to have a dream and then
Mm.
take consistent action towards getting there and then actually living in that dream when it becomes a reality. And it was like one of the most insane experiences ever because it was actually happening. And
Mm.
it's just one of those things, where you don't really believe that it's going to happen until it does because of what you decided to do and committed to doing all the times you wanted to. More importantly, all the times you didn't want to. I can't tell
Yeah.
you how many times I got to Sunday night at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and I was like, oh, God, dude, I got to do a podcast right now
Yep.
because the week got away from me or whatever. But it was those ones that sometimes turned into the best episodes that I had had. And it was in those moments that you also need to continue becoming somebody who does hard things when you don't want to in order to actually achieve the dreams that you're working towards. And so I don't want to, like just gloss over that because there were so many times that I didn't want to actually do the podcast on a Saturday, Sunday night or, having to just like figure things out when super tired, 10:30, and you're waiting for this thing to upload and figuring out what the hell am I going to say in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. So it was really nice when I decided to work smarter, not harder, and actually record like, 6, 7 episodes at a time and then be able to
Mm.
actually have them ready to go. So those are all things you figure out along the way. Don't worry about the how. Just focus on what you actually want to get to. Have a very simple plan and then figure it out along the way was kind of how this one turned out. Uh,
100%.
yeah, man. So, but the actual day, I'll never forget the day. And I took a PTO. It was on a Tuesday. I took a PTO. I told my boss, I was like, yo, man, got this podcast lined up. I just knocked one of these dreams, like out of my bucket list. And he's like, dude, have fun, man. He was like so supportive. And, because even coming into this company, I was very straight up with what I do. They all knew I do a podcast. They all knew that I do the content stuff. They're very supportive of it. And so it's nice to be encouraged around great
Mm.
people who are supporting you along your journey. But this day, I remember I wrapped work on that Monday afternoon. I hopped in the car and I drove 6.5 hours to Kelowna, Canada, and it was a wild experience, man. I got to my Airbnb that night and listened to a bunch of, I listened to Dan's audiobook on the way, and I listened to a couple podcasts with Dan. I listened to some pump up music. I listened to some emotional music. I talked with some people, and it was just like all the feelings. And so I just really embraced being in the moment of everything, is how I was really trying to approach the the whole 24-hour period. And, then that next morning woke up, went on the founders hike, met amazing people. It was like this whole thing was coming to reality. And then went on a run around Kelowna, just kind of freed my mind, saw some, it was like beautiful. Have you been to Kelowna, Canada?
No, but it looks insane.
It's
Yeah.
insanely amazing and strikingly gorgeous. And so it was a really cool place to be. I've followed Dan for so long that I had all these different topics that I thought I could talk about, and had all these different routes and directions that you could go. And so I did struggle a little bit trying to figure out, where do I actually want to go with the conversation? What am I curious about? What is he excited about? What's he got going on in his life that he would probably be super passionate to talk about? What would add the most value to audiences? I had all these different questions floating around in my head. So it was a little difficult at times to like boil it down to just a couple, right? And
Hmm.
so that's ultimately what I did is, in the preparation, obviously I've read his book and listened to the audiobook. I've listened to a bunch of different podcasts. I mean, I've listened to so much of his content over years, but I also wanted to be very in tune with what was he doing right now. So I went back and watched like his last 3 and 4 latest vlogs that he has on his kind of like uncut channel. I made sure that I was tuning in with all the most relevant content so that I could, have some points to pick and choose from if and when that time came up to reference them. And then, I just boiled it down to 3 to 4 canned questions that I knew I could like pivot to at some point in time. And so the strategy that I developed was, let me just know how I'm going to open it, see where it goes, have these 3 to 4 questions that I can pull from, and then know how I'm going to finish it. So that was ultimately, and then I just then I just went for it, man. And, I kind of did some walk around Kelowna, deep breathing, enjoying the moment in the sunshine. It was a gorgeous day. So I was just really living in the moment, and then walked into the building, went into the elevator opens, and I'm just literally at the doorstep of Martell Media Studios. So it's just crazy. Like, there it is. I walk in, and it's the whole media team and production studio. And so I kind of sat there. And then I ended up getting a little tour around the office, met the whole team. Dan was recording something in the studio at that time. And then, I had a 2 to 3 p.m. time slot. And sure enough, like, he came out and introduced himself. And it was super cool because, obviously Dan preaches buy back your time, and, be, know the value of your time and know the value of an hour. But for that hour, like, you know, he was super present, and
Mm.
which was something that I appreciated, right? Like, and I would expect that, like, guy of his stature to be super present in what he's doing. But it was just cool because you never know what you're gonna get from people. And I felt welcomed. I felt like he was just fully in tune with everything. And let me tell you though, the minute that we sat down on the couches in the studio, I was like, holy shit, this is
This
really
is
going down.
this is real.
Yeah, this is real. He was like, "How did you get here? How are you sitting in front of
Yeah.
me? Like, what is the deal?" He's like, "I don't know if you recall, but you challenged me to get to 100 episodes. I did. Here we are." Was like the bottom line. And he was fired up because, to your point,
That's so
so many
cool.
people don't ever get past 5, 6 episodes, right?
Yeah.
So many people, like the way that he put it, don't have follow through skills. And,
Mm.
so it was like a very cool experience to be able to relate on that. And then, ultimately that's where we started with the conversation. But yeah, man, it's crazy just actually living in the dream and living in the moment of it. It was like, yeah, it was
It's
crazy.
so cool to hear. It's almost like hearing you describe that day is almost like hearing somebody describe their wedding day.
Mm,
But it's such like a big thing that you remember like every detail because of how much effort and energy went into it.
mm,
And it sounds like you had one of those key like takeaways of him being like really present with you in time
mhm.
and the follow through skills. But I'm curious, is there anything or what did you learn from him through that conversation that will stick with you moving forward?
I'll always remember we were talking about coaching. So there were a couple of things that I did want to ask him about. I was very curious about Ed Milet. I know we mentioned him earlier. Ed Milet is Dan's coach. And so I was curious about things that he learned from Ed Milet. And he's so very powerfully, for any of those listening, like, coaching is single-handedly the best investment that you can ever make in yourself, assuming you have the right coach.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is we have all these different investment vehicles: real estate, 401ks, stocks, market, whatever. The single-handedly most important and transformative investment that you can ever make is in yourself. And how he framed it was that the transformation happened at the transaction. And it was just the
Mm.
way that he put it. He was like, the minute that he handed or wired the money over to Ed Milet, which is no small fee by any stretch of the imagination, that's when the transformation happened. Like, I believe in myself. And it was just like
Mm.
this immediate transformation that he described going through. And so that was something that just completely reinvigorated me for, just continuing to double down on you and your strengths to become the best version of yourself in all areas of life in order to have the most impact that you can have as a human, and then give yourself the best life possible. And then therefore all of those around you as well. So that was something that really, really stuck out to me. I
Isn't that
see.
really cool to like think about? So the transformation occurs at the transaction.
Right.
You started by talking about sales and like the transfer of belief and how that happens through sales. Like you're really good at selling other people and like when you really believe in them.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like the same thing, that connection between transformations happening through the the transference of belief. So I don't know. I just
100%.
thought that was like a really cool, like just connection from like what you talked about at the beginning to what he's talking about.
Oh, and to your point, that was the first thing that he actually answered in our conversation was that his life is, you know, uh, summarizing here, his life is essentially, you know, um, a product of the belief of other people in him and the right
Wow.
people coming into his life at all the right times. He was like, dude, like just the belief that Ed instilled in me, that was worth every single penny that I could have ever asked for. And which is crazy to me because I'm like, well, I look at you, outside looks at you, like you got it made, you're doing amazing things. It would be crazy to think that you don't actually believe in yourself. It's like, Colin, we all have doubts and fears and insecurities and imposter syndrome. And for somebody like Ed Milet to actually look at him and say, dude, you freaking got it. Like, and then it reminded me of all the people that have
Yes.
instilled belief in me, just like
Yes.
as a listener, for all the people that have instilled belief in you, like those are the people that have helped transform you to the person that you are today. And so, I don't think any of us are standing here without the help and belief of other people. At least that's my experience in life. And I can count endless numbers of people who have gotten me to where I am.
Does that create more belief in yourself after meeting him and hearing him talk about like the same resistance that he experiences? Because I'm sure you kind of like put him up on this pedestal and almost assume that he doesn't experience that. So, how has it changed? And how has this whole process changed your own belief in yourself?
Well, I appreciate the question because, if I'm being fully transparent, there were times where I felt severely outmatched, right? Like sitting on that couch across from Dan Martell, like I felt imposter syndrome multiple times
Yeah,
throughout that experience. And to the point where it was almost like these out of body experiences at times. I'm like, I deserve to be in this conversation. I've earned the right. And I had to remind
100%.
myself that I've earned the right to have a seat at the table. And, but it was still like, holy shit, like he's speaking into my soul right now. And thank God I had those questions planned out in my head because there was a couple times where I'm like, all right, let me just like recap and transition because I don't quite know where to go with this right now. So let me just,
Yeah.
you know, earn my keep for a minute. But it was, so walking away from that though, I do feel like I walked away with more belief in myself because it happened and I made it happen, right?
Mm,
Through a lot of different aspects and dots that needed to connect. But ultimately, it's like in order to actually get in that spot, like I had to do the reps to get there. That was one of the things that we talked about. I was like, if he would have said
definitely.
yes at episode number 8, I told him no chance that I would have actually been prepared or equipped. Like if I felt that way after doing 103 episodes, I can't imagine how I would have felt trying to interview Dan Martell at episode 8.
And
Right. And so,
it wouldn't have meant as much
no, no.
because you put so much work into it
Yeah.
doing the 90 plus episodes to get there.
Yeah.
That's so
That's right.
cool.
That's right.
Yeah. What was there anything else that was like a big takeaway or something that you feel like is going to stick with you moving forward?
I think that is probably like the biggest one for listeners and audience is just to, regardless of how the results turn out, be proud of the work that you've done. Like, look and actually, and like actually give yourself credit for the achievements that you've had. And what
Mm,
I mean by that is, although there were times where I felt, quote, unmatched or I felt like imposter syndrome, there is a reason that I was sitting on that couch. It says there is a reason that you, the listener individual, are sitting in whatever seat you're sitting in right now. Like you have earned the right to be there through the things that you've done, actions that you've taken, accomplishments that you've had, people that you've impacted. Right. And so just being able to remind yourself that you have been able to create that, that life. You know, and if you're still striving for more, which, we all are, like it's still going to take doing more action and just, having a plan in order to get there. And then do the thing. And so, but as for like Dan, takeaways. Yeah, there's probably so many, and we're still like working through. I got a buddy working on the project for it right now. So maybe that's yeah. Actually, I walked away actually feeling like I was living through the buy back your time principles. And so for those that don't know, Dan, like his whole thing is buy back your time, and so that you can actually do the things that light you up and make you money. Like that is ultimately the bottom line. So he talks about if you are really good at sales, like you should just do sales in your day to day. For example, whatever you can outsource, maybe it's like automating your follow up or automating the admin tasks or automating, I know this is super cliche, but your yard service or
Hmm.
somebody to come and like do things around the house or whatever, like wherever you're at in life. But his point is we are all really good and gifted at certain things, and we all in tandem with that have things that we absolutely love doing. And for me, it's like how can I just be interacting with clients and on calls and with people more often, more of the time. And so it's like what can I actually buy back? And so like for this video, old me before going to meeting Dan Martell is like I would have sat down and not invested the money to a professional to
Yeah.
actually get this production done. And so right now, I'm like doing my day-to-day job, right? Working in tech sales and doing super well with my own stuff. And in the background, I hired a friend to actually build out the interview, build out the YouTube and the podcast and do reels with it. And so it's like while I am earning money doing the
Hmm.
things that light me up and that I'm loving and making me money, he is also working on that in the background. And so then now I will have assets to actually use and distribute when I'm actually done working or over the week. Like the thing would never get done also if I just hadn't outsourced it. Like there's no
Yeah.
chance, nor to the level, because
Oh,
what my plan
100%.
is now is to take that and double down on the principle and take this production, post it to Upwork once it's done so that I can actually hire a virtual assistant to then show them the work that I'm aiming for so that I actually don't have to continue worrying about doing the actual video production because it's like I was thinking about this the other day in yoga and it just like hit me. I'm like, what am I really good at? So for those listening, what are you really good
Yep.
at that only you can do? And for me, I realized that I'm really good at conducting the interviews, doing the very specific research to ask the right questions in these interviews to then, convert that into a form of writing, whether that's on LinkedIn or the newsletter. And I could never hire somebody to do that because that is what I'm really good at and that is what ultimately will make the most money as well. And so if I can just focus on doing those, bringing on the right guests, asking the right questions, conducting amazing interviews, and then outsource the things that, I can hire somebody to do that I could do, but it's not worth my time in order to actually do that because it's not like I'm super in love with that. Honestly, I think I'm walking away with that is like
That's
this,
so cool.
yeah, the buyback
It's cool
principle,
to think
it was
about
real.
how you're learning that, 1 to 2 years into your decade long commitment. So this one goal, this one interview will teach you this principle and this skill that you can apply for the next 8+ years as
Right.
you grow your your content and media business around the
Yeah.
podcast and YouTube. Like that's so cool to think about. And I cannot wait to hear that, man. Seriously, I'm so pumped. And so I think kind of like one of the things as we're starting to kind of wrap this up, I'm
Can I step
curious.
in real quickly? Can I
Yeah,
step in
go
real
for it.
quickly?
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize one point, and sorry to cut you off.
No, it's cool.
For your listeners, for people listening, when you have the opportunity, I could have very easily have done a Zoom call. There's no chance in
Yeah.
hell that I was going to do a Zoom call with Dan Martell, right? There
Yeah.
is there was no other option other than getting in my car
Get in
and
there.
driving the 6.5 hours to Kelowna, Canada to meet and shake his hand and actually do the thing live because it's experiences in life that we will never be able to either repeat in the exact way that they were or have that unique experience that we can take advantage of. And at the end of the day, when we're looking back and we're 85 years old, right? Are you going to remember the Zoom call that you did where you kind of met
Mm,
somebody through, through this camera? Or are you going to remember the whole experience of actually doing the thing you're probably resisting a little bit more, but ultimately is going to just create this life resume that you're super excited to have lived through in order to actually, live the life that you ultimately do want. And so, not to take away from like Zoom calls and things like that, because they're very necessary for experiences like this. When you can make it happen, make it happen. Anyway, all right,
that's
sorry.
such a good point too. Like when you, and I think when you have like an opportunity like that,
Right.
you got to go for it. You got to commit. You got to do whatever it takes to get there and to make it happen. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that with me. So kind of what I was thinking to just kind of start to wrap this up, because we've talked a lot about your origin story. We talked about this goal and like the process of getting there and some of like your biggest takeaways. And this is all like under that umbrella of like your seeds of success, because that's the, kind of the main thing that you talk about. So what would you say has been like one of your top like seeds of success that has helped you in your life and with this goal and with your future goals?
I mean, I was thinking about this even like, what are my seeds of success, right? And even through this conversation, one thing I'm realizing is that it's all about how you respond to things. Like, that is
Mm,
ultimately a seed of success to me, because it is always 100% within our control of how we respond to a given situation, right? There's
yeah.
always going to be an event. There's always going to be a response that we get to choose in order to then influence the outcome that can occur. And so I think that's like, and I first learned that concept through Colin Henderson and, master your mindset. And, that was ultimately where E plus R equals O stemmed from. But it has been very transformative because it's all rooted in things that we can control. And I know it's super cliche. And for those listening, I was taught very long ago that those things that are cliche, we should listen to even more and act on,
They're
because
true.
they very well are true. Exactly. So I would say just, and that kind of goes along like the mindset of things happen for us instead of to
100%.
us. So getting out of victim mindset and getting into, I don't know what the opposite is of victim mindset, but maybe like responsibility or accountability or ownership mindset, right? So I would say that's
100%.
that's like the first thing that comes to my mind. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that physical movement and training and exercise is a massive seed to my success, because
Hmm.
I don't think I'd be anywhere near the place that I would be if I didn't work out and sweat every day. It is like the single handedly probably number one keystone habit that is a part of just, it's not even a habit. It's just the way that I live. And that is something that, I mean, it doesn't matter if we're traveling, how much sleep we've had, if it's, super early in the morning, late at night, if the workout is going to get done, it's not even like just training, like I have this mindset of like always being game ready. Right.
Mm,
And so, just so for whatever comes your way, like being able to say yes to things from a physical side of things, but also, exercise, movement, sweating, it helps with your mental thoughts and clarity. It brings you ideas. Like, I can't tell you how many
yes.
ideas have come from a run or in yoga or on the bike or in the gym or whatever so that would be like another seed of success that just is literally movement and exercise. And then, yeah, I mean, just like continuing to embrace curiosity and your own natural sense of curiosity. And oftentimes there will be resistance with that. And so I would encourage your listeners and for those listening to follow the resistance. And I first learned about this concept from a book called Turning Pro. Now that I think about it, was recommended by Dan Martell on that same podcast like 2 years ago. And so I picked that book up, read it immediately, and it is just this like thought. It's basically this concept of when you feel resistance, to lean into it and to take action in spite of that resistance, because oftentimes, just like with fear, just like with discomfort, everything that you want is on the other side of it. So those would be my
Mm.
seeds to
It's
success.
so it's so cool to even think about how all of this started, and a lot of these big takeaways started with you listening to his podcast and taking action on it too. So it's like there's so much power in these conversations and these podcasts when you take action and when you apply them in the context and in the way that makes the most sense in your own life. And so I just want to say, like, I'm super proud of you, man. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing like the process of going after a massive goal and for sharing your takeaways. And so for anybody who's listening and wants to follow you, follow your journey, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, you can go Spotify, Apple Podcasts for the Seeds of Success podcast. You can reach out to me on Instagram, shoot me a DM. You can follow me at Coolin2322. That's Coolin with two O's. And currently I'm writing every day on LinkedIn for the next year. So you can just type in Colin, Colin, 1L, Walters, Walters. And then Seeds of Success should just Google that and should pop right up. And that's about where you can find me.
Colin is just like a content machine, just cranking it out. And I think, like, even tying it back to the beginning, it all just comes from your natural curiosity and your passions and your drive for learning. And so for anybody who is listening to this, I want to challenge you to follow your passions, to set like these decade long commitments and to set these targets and to actually commit and follow through. Because on the other side of it, you have those experiences that Colin talked about today with Dan Martell, those out of body experiences, those, oh shit, I actually did it. And the lessons and the growth that comes from that is just so rewarding. And so I'm leaving this conversation super energized and ready to go. And so, Colin, thanks so much, man.
Mario, I appreciate you having me on. And for those, for everybody listening, just know that none of this may have happened without my work with Mario. And I just want to make sure that that's clearly known because Mario and I had a coaching relationship, coach client, and Mario was my coach. And we started setting these goals of the podcast, of the coaching business. Like when we started working together, I don't know if I had 4, 5, 6 episodes when we first started working together. And sure enough, your belief in me, the work that we did, the transformation at the transaction obviously occurred. Don't know if I'd be here without the work that we did, but not willing to bet against it. So I just want to leave
Thank you for saying that, man.
Yeah,
yeah,
man.
it was.
I want to leave your audience with that.
That's why it's so cool to see you go for it. And I'm super inspired. And so for everybody that's listening, plant your seeds, make it happen, follow through.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Seeds of Success podcast. If you got to the end of this episode, can you please do me a huge favor and leave a 5-star rating and review? This helps me be able to reach out to bigger guests and also be able to get access to special events and activities that otherwise would not be possible without your support. So if you could please take just 3 seconds and leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me, and I will see you on the next episode.